The universe, as it turned out, was run by the kind of beings who probably color-coded their sock drawers and had never once in their extraordinarily long lives decided to eat dessert before dinner. The Galactic Administrative Collective, or GAT for those who enjoyed acronyms that sounded like someone choking on alphabet soup, had been organizing the known cosmos for roughly 47,000 years. They had systems for systems, protocols for protocols, and if you really wanted to make their day, you could ask about their committee oversight subcommittee, which oversaw the committees that oversaw other committees. It was, by every measurable standard, incredibly efficient. Also, by every measurable standard, soul-crushingly tedious. The GAT consisted of 17 species, each more evolved than the last, each having transcended their baser instincts to embrace what they called logic-based enlightenment. The Hynari had 4 brains and used all of them to calculate the most efficient way to organize conference schedule. The Vexlor possessed crystalline consciousness and could process information at speeds that made quantum computers look like they were counting on their fingers. The Balthorians had evolved past physical form entirely and existed as pure thought, which seemed impressive until you realized they spent most of that existence filing reports. Together, they had created a universe of order. Crime was practically non-existent, solved through statistical prediction models. Wars had been eliminated through diplomatic frameworks, so complex that by the time anyone figured out how to properly declare one, they'd forgotten what they were angry about. Even art had been perfected. The GAT had determined the mathematically optimal ratio of color, form, and composition to produce maximum aesthetic appreciation. Every painting looked exactly the same. It was, they assured each other, beautiful. And then there was Earth. Oh, Earth was the cosmic equivalent of that one house in the neighborhood with the overgrown lawn, the rusted car on blocks in the driveway, and the occasional sound of someone yelling about sports at 3 a.m. Nobody had invited Earth to join galactic civilization. Earth had simply figured out faster-than-light communication through what could only be described as aggressive trial and error, started broadcasting into the void, and somehow managed to jury-rig a response when the GAT sent their standard greetings new sentient life package. The GAT had been observing Earth for approximately 73 years, which in galactic terms was roughly equivalent to taking a long blink. What they saw disturbed them. Humans appeared to make decisions based on something called feeling. They created art that had no mathematical optimization whatsoever. They fell in love with members of their own species for reasons that defied probability matrices. They cried at moving pictures. They laughed at things that weren't even factually amusing. Worst of all, they seemed to enjoy it. The administrative collective had dealt with primitive species before. Usually, such species either evolved into logical beings or destroyed themselves through entirely predictable patterns of resource depletion and tribal conflict. Humans, however, were doing neither. They were surviving, thriving even, through what appeared to be sheer chaos and spite. This was unacceptable. And so, the GAT did what any reasonable collection of hyper-advanced beings would do. They scheduled a hearing to determine whether humanity should be classified as a civilization-level threat, and dealt with accordingly. Dealt with accordingly was bureaucratic speak for removed from existence, but saying it that way required less paperwork. The decision to evaluate Earth for extinction was made on a Thursday, Galactic Standard Time, by a subcommittee of the subcommittee that handled anomalous species integration. It was filed under Form 77B, subsection 12, Addendum 43. Very official, very proper, very likely to result in the complete obliteration of 8 billion humans who had no idea they were even being discussed. Humanity discovered all of this completely by accident. A communications technician named Ollie Watts, working the night shift at the International Space Communication Array in Perth, had been trying to boost the signal on a satellite feed when he accidentally intercepted what he initially thought was spam. The message was titled, Rashi, Species Evaluation Notification, Urgent, and appeared to be the 47th reply in an ongoing email chain, discussing Earth's concerning behavioral patterns and logical incompatibility with civilized space. Ollie read it 3 times. Then he read it again. Then he called his supervisor, who called their supervisor, who called someone in a government building somewhere, who presumably called someone else in a fancier government building, and within 8 hours the entire planet knew that they were essentially on the universe's chopping block. The initial response was predictably chaotic. World leaders held emergency sessions. Scientists demanded more data. Religious leaders had varying opinions about whether this was prophecy or just really bad timing. The internet, naturally, produced memes. Lots of memes. There was something darkly hilarious about discovering you weren't alone in the universe, and also discovering the universe was considering evicting you, all in the same afternoon. But here was the thing about humans. The thing the GAT had somehow failed to properly calculate, despite all their advanced modeling. Humans were phenomenally good at uniting against a common threat, especially when that threat had the audacity to tell them they weren't good enough. Within 2 weeks, Earth had organized a response team, not through careful committee selection or logical capability assessment, but through a combination of who speaks well, under pressure, who won't accidentally start an interstellar incident, and who's available. The result was a delegation of 7 humans from various fields: a diplomat, a philosopher, a physicist, a biologist, an artist, a comedian, and inexplicably a chef, because someone on the selection committee thought it might be good to have someone who understood bringing things together. The GAT, upon receiving Earth's request to attend their own extinction hearing, was surprised. Most species, when informed of their impending evaluation, either launched doomed military campaigns or simply accepted their fate. Humans wanted to argue about it. How perfectly on brand. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, at the GAT's Central Governance Station, a structure the size of a small moon, that looked like someone had asked an algorithm to design a building with maximum efficiency and zero personality. Earth's delegation traveled there via a GA transport ship, which was comfortable, sterile, and had the aesthetic warmth of a maximum security refrigerator. During the journey, the 7 humans prepared their defense. They had evidence, arguments, statistical analyses of humanity's achievement. They had speeches about art and love and the human spirit. They had presentations about technological innovation and cultural diversity. They also had absolutely no idea if any of it would matter. The truth was, humanity had spent less than a century knowing they weren't alone in the universe, and now they were expected to justify their existence to beings who had been contemplating the cosmos since before humans had figured out agriculture. It was the ultimate test, and they were taking it without having studied the material. But they showed up anyway, because that was what humans did. They showed up to fights they couldn't win, argued cases they couldn't prove, and believed in possibilities that had no logical basis for existence. The GAT considered this irrational. Humans considered it Tuesday. As the transport ship docked at the governance station, the 7 humans gathered their materials, straightened their clothes, and prepared to walk into a room where 17 species would judge whether their entire world deserved to continue existing. The diplomat, a woman who had spent 30 years negotiating international treaties, looked at her companions and said, "Remember, stay calm, stay logical, and for the love of everything, don't mention the part about us launching a car into space just to see if we could." The comedian grinned. No promises, and with that reassuring note, humanity went to trial. The GAT tribunal chamber was exactly what you'd expect from beings who had optimized everything, including architectural intimidation. The room stretched upward into darkness, with 17 elevated platforms, arranged in a perfect circle, each one hovering at precisely calculated heights to ensure no species appeared more important than another, which, ironically, made the whole thing look like a celestial judgment scene from every religious painting humanity had ever produced. But nobody was about to point that out. The 7 humans stood in the center on a platform that was definitely, absolutely, not at all symbolically lower than everyone else's. The Hinari representative spoke first, their 4 brains working in tandem to produce a voice that sounded like a committee had achieved conscious. Species designation, human. World designation, Earth. You have been summoned to address concerns regarding your compatibility with civilized galactic society. Your presence here is noted and appreciated. Thanks for having us, the diplomat said, which earned her a confused look from 3 different species who didn't understand gratitude as a reflexive social gesture. We shall proceed with the presentation of evidence. The Vexlor announced, their crystalline form, refracting light in ways that were probably mathematically perfect and definitely gave everyone headaches. The Galactic Administrative Collective has conducted extensive observation of your species. Our findings are troubling. A holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, because apparently even beings of pure logic enjoyed a good visual aid. The first image showed a crowd of humans screaming at a sporting event. Exhibit 1, the Balthorian consciousness intoned, somehow managing to sound condescending, despite having no vocal cords. Humans regularly gather in large numbers to watch other humans engage in physical competition. They experience extreme emotional responses to outcomes that have no bearing on their survival. Note the irrational investment in tribal loyalty to organizations that exist solely for entertainment. The physicist started to explain the social bonding aspects of sports, but the diplomat gently touched her arm. "Let them finish," the gesture said. "Let them show all their cards first." The display shifted to a compilation of reality television shows. A cooking competition, where someone was crying over a burnt soufflé. A dating show where participants were making decisions based on chemistry. A survival program, where humans voluntarily suffered for the entertainment of other humans. Exhibit 2, your species creates and consumes entertainment that showcases your own failures, conflicts, and emotional volatility. You appear to enjoy watching yourselves make poor decisions. To be fair, the comedian muttered, that one's hard to defend. The chef elbowed him. Next came social media arguments. Hundreds of them, thousands. People debating everything from politics to whether a hot dog was a sandwich, with a passion that suggested the fate of nations hung in the balance. Exhibit 3. Your communication networks are primarily used for conflict. Humans seek out opposing viewpoints not for synthesis or understanding, but for confrontation. You have created technology that connects your entire species, and you use it to argue about. The Vexlor paused, as if struggling to process the data, whether it is acceptable to put pineapple on a particular food item. It's not, someone from the human delegation whispered. It absolutely is. Someone else whispered back. The diplomat closed her eyes. They were doomed. But the degage wasn't finished. The display showed human cuisine, specifically the alarming tendency to deep-fry objects that had no business being deep-fried. Butter, candy bars, entire sticks of frozen sugar. The Hynari's 4 brains looked like they were trying very hard not to short-circuit. Exhibit 4, your species deliberately creates food that shortens your lifespan, knowing full well the consequences, because, and we quote from your own research, it tastes good. This is not survival behavior. This is not even logical hedonism. This is collective self-destruction disguised as culture. The chef looked personally attacked. Furthermore, the Balthorian continued, and oh good, there was more. You engage in recreational activities that serve no purpose beyond emotional satisfaction. You create art with no optimal structure. You produce music that cannot be mathematically perfected. You write stories about events that never happened. You cry at moving pictures that you know are fictional. You form pair bonds based on intangible qualities you call love, that defy every probability model we possess. The display showed more examples. Humans dancing. Humans laughing at jokes. Humans climbing mountains because they're there. Humans adopting animals that provided no functional benefit. Humans making decisions that prioritized happiness over efficiency. In summary, the Hynari said, humanity represents a fundamental incompatibility with the logical framework that governs civilized space. You are emotionally volatile, demonstrably irrational, and appear to celebrate these qualities rather than attempting to evolve beyond them. The question before this council is not whether you are primitive. Many species begin this way, but whether you show any indication of evolving toward enlightenment. The chamber fell silent. 17 species waited for humanity's defense. The diplomat stood up, her carefully prepared speech suddenly feeling incredibly inadequate. She had statistics about human achievements, scientific breakthroughs, artistic accomplishments,
humanitarian effort. But looking at the evidence the Degaic had presented, at the way they'd framed humanity's entire existence, as a series of logical failures, she realized that arguing within their framework would be conceding their point. So she did something that her 30 years of diplomatic training had specifically taught her never to do. She went off script. "You're absolutely right," she said. The physicist made a strangled noise. The philosopher looked like he might faint. "Humans are irrational. We make terrible decisions. We eat food that kills us slowly because it brings us joy. We spend resources on art that has no survival function. We form attachments to other beings that leave us vulnerable. We cry at fictional stories. We argue about sandwich. We do all of these things, and yes, we do them deliberately." The Vexlor's crystalline structure flickered with what might have been confusion. "Then you concede that your species is incompatible with civilized society?" "No," the diplomat said, and smiled in a way that suggested the next words out of her mouth were going to be a problem. "I'm conceding that your definition of civilization is incomplete." The chamber erupted in what could only be described as highly organized confusion. Several species attempted to speak at once, then stopped, then consulted their protocols for who had speaking priority during unexpected procedural disruptions. The diplomat pressed on. "You've spent 47,000 years optimizing everything, creating systems, eliminating chaos, making everything efficient and logical and perfect. And you know what you've built? A universe where every painting looks the same, where nobody argues because nobody disagrees, where everything is so perfectly calculated that nothing surprising ever happened." "Precisely," the Hynari said, as if she'd just made their point. "We have achieved optimal societal function. You've achieved optimal boredom," the comedian cut in. "Because of course he did. You've created a universe where everyone's so busy being logical that nobody's actually living." The artist stepped forward, holding up a painting she'd brought, a messy, chaotic explosion of colors that followed no mathematical optimization whatsoever. "This makes no sense by your standards. The composition is unbalanced. The composition is unbalanced. The colors clash. There's no logical structure. And yet," she paused, "it makes people feel something, not calculate something, not process something, feel something. Feelings are inefficient." The Balthorian stated. "Feelings are the point," the biologist countered. "Every species here evolved past survival needs. You have unlimited resources, perfect health, functional immortality. So what are you all doing with eternity? Filing reports? Optimizing systems? You've solved every problem except the one that matters. What do you do when survival isn't the goal anymore?" The chamber fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. The kind where 17 species were perhaps, possibly, maybe starting to realize that the humans had just accused them of wasting several thousand years of post-scarcity existence on bureaucracy. The physicist pulled up her own holographic display showing human history. Not the achievements, the mistakes, the failures, the countless times humans had done things inefficiently, incorrectly, or completely backwards, and somehow stumbled into something new anyway. We invented flight because we were too stupid to know it was impossible with our biology. We created jazz because someone broke the rules of music, and decided it sounded better that way. We went to space because we looked up and wondered what was out there, not because it was logical or efficient, or optimal. The philosopher, who had been quiet this entire time, finally spoke. "You've built a perfect universe. Congratulations. You've also built a static one. Nothing changes because change is inefficient. Nothing new happens because new things are unoptimized. You've achieved enlightenment, and traded away the possibility of ever being surprised again. And let me guess," the chef added, because apparently everyone was just adding their piece now, "your food is probably nutritionally perfect, and tastes like absolutely nothing." The uncomfortable silence from 17 species was answer enough. The comedian grinned. "We rest our case."
The diplomat could feel the moment shifting, which in diplomatic terms meant things were either about to go brilliantly or catastrophically. With no middle ground in sight, she decided to keep pushing, Because at this point they'd already insulted the entire Galactic Order's life choices. So why stop now? Here's what I think happened, she said, pacing the lower platform like she was giving a lecture rather than defending her species from extinction. You all evolved past your survival instincts, achieved post-scarcity societies, eliminated conflict, and then looked around and thought, now what? And instead of finding an answer, you built systems to avoid asking the question. The Hynari's 4 brains appeared to be processing this at different speeds, creating a sort of delayed, confused expression. We built civilization. You built a very elaborate distraction. The philosopher corrected, and now you're threatened by us because we remind you of something you've lost. We have lost nothing, the Vexler said, though their crystalline structure was refracting light in increasingly agitated patterns. We have evolved beyond base instinct. You've evolved beyond joy, the artist said, quietly, and I think part of you knows it. This was the moment where the diplomat made the decision that would either save humanity or confirm every single one of the GX's concerns about human irrationality. She looked at her team, and nodded. They were going to double down on crazy. The physicist pulled up a new display, but instead of charts and data, it showed a human child laughing at a puppy. Just that. Nothing else. 10 seconds of a kid absolutely losing it because a small dog had done something the child found hilarious. This serves no survival function, the physicist said. The child gains no resources. The dog provides no evolutionary advantage. And yet, this moment, this completely irrational response to an animal's behavior, is what humans live for. We chase these moments. We build our entire lives around the possibility of experiencing them. The biologist added another image, a garden. Not a food garden, not a practical garden. An old man growing flowers that would die in a week, spending hours arranging them for no reason except that he found them beautiful. We befriend things that can't help us, the biologist continued. We took wolves, the most dangerous predators we lived alongside, and over thousands of years turned them into hundreds of different companions. Not because we needed them, but because we wanted them. We looked at a wild animal and thought, what if that could be our friend? The comedian stepped forward with footage of a comedy club. Humans sitting in the dark, listening to someone talk, and erupting into laughter at carefully constructed observations about everyday absurdity. We invented an entire art form based on pointing out how nothing makes sense. We pay people to make us laugh at our own contradictions. We celebrate the absurdity of existence instead of trying to optimize it away. The chef, not to be outdone, showed food again, but not deep-fried disasters this time. A family dinner. Multiple generations gathered around a table, sharing a meal that took hours to prepare and minutes to consume. And the point wasn't the nutrition, it was the being together. We turn eating into ritual, the chef said. We make food that takes days to prepare properly. We argue about recipes passed down through families. We create entire cultural identities around how we combine ingredients. It's inefficient, impractical, and absolutely essential to who we are. The artist showed painting after painting, sculpture after sculpture, each one different, each one breaking rules in new ways. We haven't found the perfect art, because we're not looking for it. We're looking for the next piece that makes us feel something we haven't felt. Every artist is trying to show the world something new, something that couldn't be calculated or predicted. The tribunal watched in silence as humanity essentially bragged about being a collective disaster. You asked if we show signs of evolving toward enlightenment, the diplomat said. The answer is no. We're not trying to. We're trying to evolve toward more complete ways of being human, more creative chaos, more irrational joy, more inefficient love. We're not broken versions of you, we're something else entirely. The Balthorian's consciousness rippled with what might have been irritation. You are describing precisely why you are incompatible with civilized space. You celebrate the qualities that lead to chaos. We celebrate the qualities that lead to life. The philosopher shot back. Real life, not optimized existence. Not perfect systems. Messy, complicated, contradictory life that doesn't make sense and doesn't need to. And then something unexpected happened. One of the species, the Fenori, who had been silent the entire hearing, spoke up. The Fenori were tall, graceful beings who looked like someone had given geometry feelings. Their representative's voice was quiet. "I have been studying human culture." The entire tribunal turned to look. Studying other species wasn't forbidden, but admitting to being interested in primitives was definitely not done in polite galactic society. Their entertainment feeds, the Fenori continued. Specifically their cooking programs. I have been watching them for approximately 8 months. The chamber somehow managed to get more silent. At first I analyzed them for anthropological data, but then I continued watching because I found them. The Fenori paused, searching for a word. Satisfying. The humans create elaborate meals knowing they will be consumed and forgotten. They compete not for resources, but for the approval of judges. They experience joy when they succeed and disappointment when they fail. And these emotions seem to drive them to improve not through optimization algorithms, but through passion. Another species, the Dravics, who resembled floating geometric shapes, added hesitantly, "I have been listening to human music. They have a form called jazz that breaks every harmonic principle we have established for optimal sound arrangement. It is chaotic and unpredictable. I have listened to it for 247 hours. I have been reading their fiction," another admitted. "A being called the Ithral, made of what looked like liquid metal. Stories about events that never occurred. People who never existed. Worlds that defy physics. The inefficiency is staggering. The emotional impact is..." They paused. "I do not have words in any of our languages." One by one, species began admitting their secret consumption of human culture. The logical, enlightened, perfectly optimized beings of the Yi had been binge-watching humanity like it was the universe's most compelling disaster documentary. The Hanori, all 4 brains working overtime, finally spoke. "This is irrelevant. Personal interest in primitive culture does not change the fundamental assessment. Humans are emotionally volatile and logically incompatible with our society." "Yes," the Fenori said simply. "And we cannot stop watching them." The diplomat felt the shift crystallize into something real. "You know what I think? I think you're not evaluating us for extinction because we're dangerous. You're evaluating us because we're a mirror, and you don't like what you see reflected." "We see chaos," the Vexlar stated. "You see life," the artist replied. "Real, messy, irrational life. The kind you gave up when you decided being perfect was more important than being alive." The Balthorian's consciousness flickered with something that might have been anger or might have been recognition. "You presume to lecture us on civilization when your species has barely achieved interstellar communication." "Yeah," the comedian said, grinning. "And in that time, we've created more art, more music, more stories, more food, more ways of experiencing existence than you have in 47,000 years of optimization. We've been here 5 minutes in cosmic terms, and we're already more interesting than you." The physicist winced, definitely not helping. But the Fenori tilted their geometric head. "That is not entirely inaccurate." The tribunal chamber descended into what could only be described as extremely orderly pandemonium. Species were consulting with each other in hushed tones that still somehow sounded bureaucratic. The Hanori's 4 brains appeared to be arguing amongst themselves. The Vexlar's crystalline structure was refracting light in patterns that probably meant something in their body language but looked like a disco ball having an existential crisis. The diplomat stood very still, trying to project confidence while internally screaming. They just spent the last hour essentially calling the entire galactic civilization boring to their faces. This was either the most brilliant diplomatic gambit in human history or the fastest path to extinction ever recorded. Probably both. The Balthorian consciousness finally coalesced into something resembling composure. "This tribunal will take a brief recess to deliberate." "How brief?" the comedian asked, because apparently he'd decided if they were going down, they might as well go down swinging. 17 minutes, 32 seconds. "Of course it is," the chef muttered. The platforms began rising, creating private consultation spaces for each species. The humans remained on their lower platform, suddenly very aware that they were trapped in the center of a room with beings who could probably atomize their entire planet with the bureaucratic equivalent of a signature. "So," the physicist said quietly, "that went well. We told the most powerful species in the galaxy that they've wasted thousands of years being boring." The philosopher replied, "I'm not sure well is the word I'd use."
The diplomat was running through every possible outcome in her head, trying to calculate their odds, when the artist actually laughed, loud enough that it echoed in the massive chamber. "What could possibly be funny right now?" the biologist hissed. "We're about to find out if the universe ends not with a bang or a whimper but with hurt feelings and an identity crisis." The artist wiped tears from her eye. "That's the most human thing that could possibly happen. We didn't get destroyed by superior weapons or advanced technology. We got destroyed because we pointed out that optimal existence is really, really dull." The comedian grinned. "At least we'll die as we live." Completely incapable of reading a room. 17 minutes and 32 seconds later. Exactly on schedule, because of course it was. The platforms descended. The 17 species looked different somehow. Less composed. The Fenori's geometric angles seemed soft. The Drevax's floating shapes were arranged in patterns that weren't quite as rigid. Even the Balthorian consciousness appeared less condensed, more dispersed, as if it had literally loosened. The Hanori spoke first, and for the first time, their 4 brains seemed to be working in actual harmony rather than parallel processing. "The tribunal has reached a decision. However, before we announce it, we have questions." The diplomat nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "The cooking programs," the Fenori said. "The ones where humans create elaborate meals and then judge them. There is a moment that occurs frequently where a contestant succeeds beyond expectations and experiences overwhelming emotion. They cry. They embrace others. They celebrate what is ultimately a temporary achievement that will be consumed and forgotten." "Why does this resonate?" The chef blinked. Of all the questions she'd expected, this wasn't one. Because it's not about the food. It's about the trying. It's about putting yourself out there, risking failure, and discovering you're capable of more than you thought. The meal gets eaten. Yeah, but the moment of realizing you can create something beautiful, that stays. The ethereal rippled. The fiction. The stories about events that never happen. We have analyzed thousands of them. They frequently end in tragedy or conflict. Why do humans create and consume narratives that cause emotional distress? The artist fielded this one. Because feeling something is better than feeling nothing. Even sad stories remind us we're alive. They help us process our own experiences, understand perspectives different from our own. We practice being human by watching other humans, even fictional ones, navigate existence. The music that breaks harmonic rules, the Drevathi said, shapes shifting uncertainly. It creates tension that resolves in unexpected ways. It is inefficient by every measure. And yet I have calculated that I have experienced something while listening that I had not experienced in 4,000 years of existence. How is this possible? The comedian answered, surprisingly serious. Because surprise is the entire point. You can't calculate joy. The moment you optimize it, it stops being joy and becomes just another system. The chaos is what makes it real. More species began asking questions. About sports and why humans cared about arbitrary competition. About why they climbed mountains that served no purpose. About why they fell in love in ways that defied probability. About why they made art that had no function except to exist. And the humans answered, each response revealing another layer of the fundamental difference between species, who had optimized existence, and a species who was still figuring out how to live. Finally, the Vexlor's crystalline structure resonated with something that might have been understanding, or might have been resignation. We believe we have identified the core issue. Here it comes. The diplomat thought. Humanity is not incompatible with civilized space. The Vexlor continued. Civilized space is incomplete without humanity. The physicist actually stumbled. I'm sorry, what? The Balthorian consciousness expanded, filling more space than before, as if the admission required extra room. We have spent 47,000 years creating a perfect society. We have eliminated suffering, conflict, inefficiency. We have solved every problem except one that we did not realize was a problem until we observed your species. We forgot how to want things. The Fenori said quietly. We have everything. We can create anything. We have optimized everything. And in doing so we have eliminated the possibility of desire, of yearning, of striving for something beyond optimal.
The Hanori's 4 brains were now clearly working together, creating a unified voice that sounded almost wistful. You climb mountains because they are there. We have not done something simply because it was there and longer than we can accurately recall. We have done things because they were logical, efficient, optimal. Never because we wanted to. You celebrate inefficiency, Drevathi added. You create art that serves no function. You form bonds that make you vulnerable. You experience emotions that are counterproductive. And you do all of this not despite the irrationality, but because of it. You have something we traded away for perfection. The Uthrol's liquid metal form shifted into something that almost looked human. You have life. Actual, irrational, messy, beautiful life. We have existence, optimized, efficient, logical existence. They are not the same thing. The diplomat felt something shift in her chest. They weren't being evaluated for extinction. They were being studied because 17 species had achieved everything they'd set out to achieve, and discovered it wasn't enough. Every species in this collective hit the same plateau, the Balthorian explained. We solved survival. We eliminated death. We perfected society. And then we spent thousands of years maintaining that perfection, creating systems to preserve it, building frameworks to ensure nothing changed. We called it enlightenment. We called it evolution. What was it actually? The philosopher asked. Stagnation, the Vexlor said simply. Beautiful, perfect, terminal stagnation. Nothing new has emerged from our civilizations in millennia. We create nothing that is not optimized. We experience nothing that is not calculated. We exist in a state of perpetual equilibrium. The Fenori's geometric form seemed to slump slightly, and then we discovered human, a species barely out of their planetary cradle, who have created more genuinely new things in a century than we have in 10,000 years. You invent things you do not need. You create art with no purpose. You form connections that make no logical sense. You do things simply because you want to see what happens. You're chaos engines, the comedian said, grinning. That's what you're saying. We're chaos engines in a universe that optimized chaos out of existence. Precisely, the Hanori agreed, and we cannot look away. Every species here has been consuming human culture in secret, because it provides something we have not experienced since we achieved enlightenment. Genuine novelty, unpredictability, the possibility that something might happen that we did not calculate in advance. The artist was smiling now, a huge grin spreading across her face. You're not bored. You're beyond bored. You're in a universe where everything is perfect and nothing matters. We prefer the term post-significance malaise, the Balthorian said. But yeah, the tribunal chamber fell silent, as the full absurdity of the situation crystallized. Humanity had been evaluated for extinction, because they represented everything the galactic civilization had spent millennia eliminating. And it turned out that everything they'd eliminated was exactly what they needed. The Vexlor's structure suddenly brightened. The tribunal's official verdict: humanity is classified not as a civilization-level threat, but as a civilization-level resource. Your species provides something the galaxy desperately needs. A reminder that perfection is not the goal. Your inefficiency, your irrationality, your chaos. These are not flaws. They are the rarest commodity in the universe. So we're not being destroyed, the biologist asked, still not quite believing it. No, the Fenori said, you are being preserved, protected. Your species must be allowed to develop naturally, without our interference or optimization. There is, however, a condition, the Hanori added, and the diplomat's relief immediately converted to suspicion. Of course there is. You must remain on your planet for the immediate future, not as punishment, but as preservation. If humanity enters galactic society too quickly, you will be influenced by our logic-based frameworks. You will begin optimizing. You will start eliminating the very chaos that makes you valuable. The Drevaxi's shapes rearranged into what might have been the geometric equivalent of a sheepish expression. We need you to stay irrational, for the good of the universe. The chef started laughing, then the comedian, then all 7 humans were laughing, the sound echoing through the massive chamber. And maybe it was hysteria, or maybe it was genuine amusement,
But either way, it was the most human possible response. They'd saved themselves by being exactly what the galaxy wanted to eliminate them for being.
So let me get this straight,
The diplomat said, wiping tears from her eyes. The most advanced civilizations in the universe just admitted that they're boring. We're interesting, and your solution is to keep us isolated so we don't catch boring from you. That is an extremely reductive summary, the Balthorian said, but essentially accurate. We'll be watching your culture, the Ythrol added, learning from it. Perhaps over time we can reintegrate some of what we lost, rediscover how to create without optimization, how to experience without calculation. You want to learn how to be irrational again, the philosopher said wonderingly. We want to learn how to be alive again, the Fenori corrected. The platforms began lowering, the hearing concluding. The humans gathered their materials, still processing the fact that they'd walked into their own extinction trial, and walked out as the galaxy's most valuable cultural resource. As they headed back to the transport ship, the comedian turned to the diplomat. So we just became the universe's entertainment. We're literally the reality show that the advanced aliens binge watch. We're the proof that chaos has value, the artist corrected. We're the reminder that perfection is overrated, the physicist added. We're the species that saved ourselves by being a beautiful disaster, the chef concluded. The diplomat smiled, looking back at the governance station, that massive monument to efficiency and order, and perfect, terrible boredom. We're human, and apparently that's enough. The transport ship carried them back toward Earth, toward a planet full of 8 billion people, making irrational decisions, creating unnecessary art, falling in illogical love, and living messy and efficient, gloriously chaotic lives. The GFT would watch, they would study, they would slowly, carefully, try to remember what it meant to do things not because they were optimal, but because they wanted to. And humanity would continue being humanity, climbing mountains because they were there, making food that killed them slowly, because it tasted good, creating art that served no function except to be beautiful, and arguing about sandwiches with the passion usually reserved for matters of cosmic significance. Somewhere in the depths of the governance station, the Fenori pulled up another cooking show. The Drivix queued more. The Ythrol downloaded another novel. 17 species who had achieved everything looked to a primitive world to remember what it meant to want anything. The universe, as it turned out, didn't need another perfectly logical civilization. It needed chaos. It needed inefficiency. It needed someone to point at the stars and say, I wonder what's out there, instead of calculating the optimal exploration strategy. It needed human, and the most advanced beings in existence had just admitted they needed to learn from the species, who deep-fried butter and cried at fictional stories. If that wasn't the most human ending possible, nothing was.